Okay, good afternoon. I hope everybody had a great lunch, has their afternoon coffees teed up like me, and looking forward to a great panel today. It's a very good topic, and but anyway, I'll just start off with, I'm Tom Suter. I'm the CEO and founder of the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and I'm really excited about today's topic. It's one that is kind of near and dear to my heart, that it's how to accelerate DevOps and cloud through new site reliability practices, or SRE. This is something that's been a recurring theme that I've seen at ATARC, where we got an outage, we can't figure out where. And I'm an old telecom guy, so this has been one of those things where everybody blames everybody else. So I'm really excited about this discussion. I think it'll be interesting. So if I can pull my panelists on, and I just want to welcome all the attendees. Special thanks to Simone Margulies, Kate Power, and the entire Datadog team. They really helped us put this together. And so just we're going to have hear from our panelists in a second. Once I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to have a Q&A session. We do have some poll questions. We are going to that's how you get your CPs, by answering the poll questions. So we try to interact with you, and then I'm going to be asking questions, but we encourage you all to ask away, and we'll try to get to everybody else. I will note, Hannah Hunt could not make it. She had the best excuse ever. She is going into labor a little bit early. She's fine. Everything's looking good there, but she was planning to be on, but she's going to be on our panel in a few months. I think we'll get her in a little bit later. But my panel today is I'll quickly introduce them, and then we're going to have each of them talk for a little bit about what their challenges are inside their organizations, and we'll get this discussion going. But we've got Rob Brown, he's Chief Technology Officer, Officer of Information Technology at United States Citizen and Immigration Services at the United States Department of Homeland Security. Welcome, Rob. Good to see you again, my friend. And we also have Sunil Madhuguri. Did I get that right, Sunil? I'm working on it. I need about 3.
You got it perfectly, sir. Yes.
Thank you. And he's at the Office of Information Technology at U.S. Customs and Border Protection at the United States Department of Homeland Security. And I think you're over at that Springfield shop, right?
Yeah. No. Actually, we moved to Ashburn. I'm currently the CTO. My colleague is Rob Brown, and the acting Chief Data Officer for CBP.
Great. Thank you. I need to come visit you because I live local. And then last but not least, we have our industry representative, Brian Mickelson. And Brian is Vice President and General Manager at the United States Public Sector for Datadog. How are you doing today, Brian?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
And I believe you're out of the office right now. I love the background, by the way.
It was better than my bedroom, so I figured we'd go this way.
Well, we're in the post-pandemic world. It's funny. I do this. I have this background, and everybody asks me. I got it. They're like, "Wow, you have the greatest place in Arlington. Must have this penthouse you're on." I don't think I could be anywhere. Believe me. Let's start off with you, Rob. Love to hear your perspectives. We haven't had you on in a little bit. I think we had you on. You were one of our frequent folks in the pandemic with all the changes you all were making. But love to hear your perspectives on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, and good to see you as well, Tom. Always a pleasure. So SRE is near and dear to my heart. We've been myself and colleagues at USCIS, including Chad Tetro and others, have been trying to work on how do we implement SRE, not just in pockets, but across the board, looking at standardizing, principles and practices, tooling, and ultimately trying to leverage as much automation as possible in the form of really sort of AI ops. And that's from, doing CI/CD and release or deployment management to, mean time to detect, to mean time to repair incident, And then trying to look at the data or operational data holistically so that we can start to do predictive analytics and get that in front of folks, mainly operators, and to some degree engineers in a tiered fashion. So we've tried to tackle this in numerous fashions with tooling, with training. I would say that we're in a state right now where we have a bit of a training skills gap, because really at the end of the day, we need the new form of these operators or SREs truly to be that, just engineers, and not just operators looking at red, yellow, and green. So that's probably one of our predominant challenges is that skills gap and getting the right folks in to help us. Of course, the tooling helps to a great deal across the board. And as we continue the discussion, happy to go into some of the specifics in the AOps area that we've been working on to make our lives easier and provide better, faster, actionable results as it relates to any sort of downtime.
Thank you for that. Next we'll go with Sunil.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. I think very similar story to what Rob mentioned just now for CVP. The only difference I would say for us, just the size who we are. So we, for SREs for us, we are a hybrid model right now with a combination of a lot of stuff we have on-prem and a bunch of stuff on the cloud. So because of that, the modeling is a little bit different for us as SRE because we need to have SRE in multiple places, like you mentioned, from comms folks to just working with communication companies. That itself is a huge thing for us because we get feeds from a bunch of places. We should make sure that that's working correctly. Tooling, of course, goes along with that, as Rob mentioned. What we have done is, initially we had to do the SRE component itself on our on-prem applications itself, just to make sure they're reliable, scalable in certain ways. 24/7 shop, as you know, CVP is. In fact, there was a little bit of outage yesterday. Some of the airlines were affected. So, there you go. So everything is affected because of that. So we have direct impact, not only from the passenger traveling, but also on the cargo component and trade component within the United States. So the stakes are very, very high for us. So SRE plays, of course, as you can imagine, a very important role. But what we have done is, we have a two-prong approach, right, for the SRE. One is the on-prem approach, make it highly available, replicated everywhere. Make sure from disaster perspective we have things in place. Tooling, of course, like Rob mentioned. We also have 3 places where we monitor it internally. Also, we have a SOC security ops. Then we have our EOC, which is enterprise operations, and our network ops, right? So we depend on a DHS in certain cases for us, for our feeds, but also 3-letter agency, just name it across the board we work with to get feeds from, right? Including other DHS components, CIS, ICE, and everybody else. So that plays a major role for our SRE. What we are doing is in the new realm now, with the cloud realm, is SRE, of course, it goes with part and parcel of that. The application we are building is to make sure that you're building scalable applications, the things which we are approving across the board within our reference architecture. That's one of the things we are working on. Rob mentioned AI ops, same thing for us. Automation is playing a big role for us. And that is kind of, I call it the last mile. The last mile is where you're converting some of these components which you're not able to automate by automating that. So that minimal human interaction, right? The human interaction, we love humans, right? But humans do make mistakes, and machines can make mistakes. If you put garbage in, garbage will come out of machines too. But the plan is we can make it more efficient from that perspective. And I think, we are doing, knock on wood, so far, we're doing okay. But the hybrid model for us is to where we are. And AI ops is big for us. So within the CTO office, we run what is called an AI Machine Learning Center of Innovation. That's going very, very well. It's across all of CBP, so putting standard across the board. So whoso is doing any development, has to use this standard. So let's see how it goes. But I think we are pretty confident. I think we'll be okay.
Fantastic. And Brian, welcome. And I know you see things across government and you also different verticals. Love to hear your comments.
Yeah, by way, just a way of introduction, 25 years in professional IT work, going back to, IBM in the late 90s. And I've had a good chance to kind of see this from that perspective, networking background with Cisco, 20 years at Red Hat. So really saw a modernization across all of government, civilian, DoD, and IC. And the problems that Rob and Sunil bring up, they're real, right? I mean, I think if there was one theme that I would bring to this conversation, it'd be in the realm of simplicity isn't simple, but it is our responsibility. I think that the challenge that we're really facing is that, the government, by its risk-adverse design, it's both an innovator, but at scale, it's a laggard customer, or it's a laggard in terms of its adoption. But there's this, I think, this constant pressure of need to innovate in order to move things forward, reduce costs, reduce churn, reduce pain in terms of like Rob talked about, pain in terms of training. But at the same time, there's a challenge to risk avoidance, to legacy systems, to prioritization of what major programs of record need to be migrated. So what I would sort of sum up here from my point of view is simplicity isn't easy. It's our obligation. And when we think about the SRE role, or we think about the world of the evolving world of DevOps and agility, I think the real question is, what are we as leaders doing to support the goals of our enterprises? So I think we all are very familiar with cloud first initiatives. If it can go in the cloud, put it in the cloud. There's reasons for that from a agility standpoint. At the same time, we are thinking about what can we do what do we do in the new normal of COVID? And so how do we support the desire to be innovative, the desire to be modern, and the desire to be a more DevOps practice beyond words, beyond process? And I think the real answer is it's this marriage between people, process, and tools. And so the question I would typically have at sort of the executive level, but it gets all the way back into what we talk about as for SREs on the ground, is what are we doing from a tooling standpoint? Where I would suggest that the state of the environment is that because we're a long tail development across the federal and state and local governments, we have just about every tool that there is, right? We've got multiple vendors, multiple tools. We've got on-premise things, we've got cloud things. And I think it's not a stretch of the imagination to say a lot of the tools themselves are siloed, which means that the people using those tools are siloed. So I think the tension we build that we have to try and manage as leaders is we're asking our teams to be more agile, to be more cloud first, to be more DevOps oriented, but are we actually supporting them through the tooling and the infrastructure that they have? So I'll leave it there, but just kind of keep on going back to that. What are we doing to simplify the environments? Because it's complex technology, but there are things we can do as we modernize to reduce that complexity through a focus on simplicity.
Yeah. I think you're bringing up a great point. I remember I've been in my career, I started in the telecom industry. I installed like OneNet at DHS in 2009, most major networks. When they were troubleshooting, there wasn't that many things, and you could kind of like troubleshoot a problem. Seems like it was fairly easily. We all had a government data center, you had a network, you had on-prem equipment. It seems like infinitely more complex now. Now the applications are way better now, but it seems like it's can you help compare and contrast the challenge set for each of the speakers? Maybe starting off with you, Rob.
Yeah. Let's talk about keeping things simple or not. You add in the mix of microservices and serverless technology, and good luck. Especially when you leave the majority of the devices, the core sort of base infrastructure, let's just say a container, to development teams. And when you've got close to 4,000 developers, or at least contributors in a GitHub repo, and it becomes quite unwieldy and not simple. So a lot of our focus has been how do we maintain that? How do we start to, first of all, wrangle it back and start to create the standards as well as the governance, so that we are talking about minimizing that complexity, not only just from a SRE perspective, but from a security perspective. Every snowflake has its own LOE as it relates to security. So one of the things that we have done is we've actually created, essentially, we call it CMI, or Common Microservice Initializer, which is a parameterized way where development teams can enter in key facets, have some selectables like Java or Python or you name it, so they can actually have within 7 minutes not only a container that has been staged and addresses the actual OS needs of the organization, creates a pipeline, and then actually runs the entire container through its own infrastructure pipeline and is prepped and ready for release for the next bit of code. So these are just some of the areas that nothing new here that we've actually been working on. We've then since coupled that with an open source tool that Spotify's developed that we've latched onto to help with that organization. So it provides all of the components and essentially an internal software catalog of everything that's going on within the organization, having sort of characteristics to that component that is, the actual CI/CD, the actual monitoring components that are important from infrastructure or even synthetics, even down to showing their downstream and upstream integration dependencies. So we've made some pretty good strides in trying to harmonize and making it simple for engineering teams to just reuse what's already there, reducing the security burden, reducing the infrastructure burden, and it's something that we've opened up for teams to just contribute to, hopefully, and instilling and improving our culture of sort of open source.
Great. Sunil?
Yeah, it's very similar to what Rob mentioned. So one of the challenges what we are having, again, like Rob said, that nothing is simple. I wish it was, especially some of the legacy applications, converting them, refactoring them, depending on how you want to use that. We have some very, very large applications. We call the national security applications. It's got high value assets from the White House. There are 16 of them, and we have quite a few of those. So what happens in those applications, you just cannot start making changes to those because that, as I mentioned earlier, has implications across the board on a daily basis. So what we are doing is, to Rob's point, something similar. We are building the reference architectures, domain-driven designs, so people can look at that and see how we can move some of these architectures along. So new legacy new greenfield application, that part is much easier, right? You're building from scratch. We do have a self-service model now where the developer, he or she can go to a portal, do stuff, create these self-imaged staked environment. Same thing like Rob mentioned, you can start with those. But that is one component of that, right? Other thing what we have done is we have completely automated our DevSecOps pipeline across the board. And that definitely helps. And along with the monitoring component is also an important component of that. And security is very important, right? So in fact, behind my board, you'll see some of the things which I'm going through right now is trying to build exactly how do we take some of the things out, add more tools and products within the pipeline. So the way we are trying to do it is it should be completely seamless to the developer to make their life easy. But both from microservices, creating API-based, like a repo, what Rob was talking about, something similar we are doing, trying to publish that across the board. But end of the day, right? I mean, the skill sets and training, those also make a huge difference. But I think agile process across the board. Now we've been doing this for a while now, so that part is working very, very well for us. But I think we still have ways to go with, especially on the data side for us. We have made some changes to it. Again, these are like massive petabytes of databases, which have grown over the years. And we're trying to do some work on the back end too, right? I mean, we are trying to create some data mesh concepts at the back end to see how do we define these meshes based on some domains, so that you're no longer doing JDBC connections through your SQL, you're actually using as an API service, which you're providing across the board. So you should be able to provide any service across the board as long as you have permission to read that particular particular table, right? So there's complexities involved. Security, I'll talk a little bit later about security if you want. A lot of stuff going in that realm also. It's just the vastness of how large we are. It just, it takes a little time to move this big ship around. That's the only thing. So.
Yeah, it's a big battleship. Brian.
Yeah, I think both those answers make, I think, perfect sense, and it's the real world challenge that we face. And then I think the question is from the leadership side of it, how do we continue down the path? I think so. I was taking some notes there, and Rob, I think you said several things that are really, if you're back to this idea of the role of the SRE and the conversation we're having here. I think you guys have taken some tremendous steps there. The idea you can through your common microservices initializer, and for people listening on this, if you're still manually creating the target environments for where the code's going to go, you're obviously creating pain in that process, and that pain is going to lead to security, governance, technical challenges. So I think, Rob, if it wasn't already called out, what you just talked about there, that's an absolute best practice from an SRE perspective, is having a standardized, automated way of getting the developers what they need. I think there's another way to think about it too, and I am just trying to connect this back to the SRE, continually. What is the role of the SRE in terms of when do they usually come in? And so from the industry perspective, I think one of the things we've seen is that it tends to be done poorly. It's a firefighting exercise at the end of the process, right? So when an issue is detected, and that's a whole different discussion about how do we even know when we're having an issue, and we start to work on our mean time to resolution. I think the challenge is that's by design, that's too late in the process. One of the things, one of the suggestions I would make for where to learn more about the SRE role, Google has an SRE podcast, and so I was listening to it as a means of just getting ready and making sure I was on point here. And there was one of the podcasts, and I apologize, I can't quote their source, but it was one of the original ones. She suggested there's 3 key questions, and they need to come at the beginning of the process. So as the development initiative is started, as the programmatic requirements and the business requirements are getting started, that's really where the SRE role, I think, starts the journey in partnership with the dev team and with the ops team, because you can see from just 3 key questions. The first question is, what will break? And so as we're thinking, as I'm developing code, the developer is probably the person that knows the best what's the potential break in this code itself. The second piece, which is probably a dev and an ops question, when it breaks, what will we do? What is the path by which we will fix it? And then finally, it is, once that happens, how do we go back and actually do our post-mortem to figure out how we get in front of that? But maybe that's a question back to Rob and Sunil, just in terms of the role of the SRE. Where do you see them getting involved in the process? Is it early in the life cycle and sort of helping the devs think about how they want to develop the code? Or do you find that in the real world, it's just happening later and it's a firefighting exercise?
Definitely in the beginning. Beginning for sure. Like you mentioned, the 3 points on the Google podcast you mentioned, that's exactly correct. And I think I heard the same podcast, and 100% correct. The lady was right on. But the only thing is that podcast is correct, but the reality is a little bit different, right? We try to get to that, trying to make changes quickly. We're trying to get something out quickly, break something else, and that definitely is so the testing method. So that's why having a strong DevSecOps pipeline to make sure every area, whatever you're putting out, we have made mistakes. We have put some old code out. We thought we're putting the new code out, right? So things like that also makes it huge. How do you put a check against that you're putting the right kind of jar files out, right? So we have seen it all, right? So it is not an easy task, but I think everything has, Rob, I'm sure will agree with me, has to be done in the beginning of the process.
You're right. It's the reality is it's usually at the end, or when somebody figures something out. It's still the reality, but I'd always reference the team topologies and the platform teams as far as an organizational construct with an underlying framework, which is the flow framework. So I think if you can get organizations to start to think in that manner and organize themselves in those patterns, then it just becomes table stakes for them to be already involved at the beginning, as opposed to just the constant firefighting. And then again, back to employing the right tools and having the right standards in place. If you can start to visualize and see that flow from, let's just say, your product hygiene creation, or Scrum, or Jira essentially, and then all of the bits in between, and you can start to look at, let's just say, DevSecOps pipeline reconciliation across multiple teams for a product. Now you can actually really have data to make good decisions and actually see the work in flight. So you can make those changes and see what's happening. You layer that with data collection from not just the application, but also your pipeline. Now you can actually imply real predictive analytics. Just had a great presentation here today by one of our teams on time series anomaly detection and some of the work that they're doing and identifying things way up front, saving at least, I think we're looking at hours of actually identifying that incident before it even happens, just based on some simple time series AI ops. So it's definitely at the beginning, shifted as far left.
Great, good stuff. One of the questions that's come in is a good one. Are there any SRE certifications that you all could recommend and recognize to truly gain the experience needed to become an SRE? A lot of SREs come from systems side within public sector and often lack the true software experience to build robust solutions. So I want to be good at SRE, and how can I do that through certifications? Anybody have some ideas on that?
I just have one idea. What I would say is, one thing I would recommend is, I think debugging tool certification really helps, because if you're a good debugger, right, that site reliability, as Rob said, we try and move to the left, but reality is something else, right? So good debugging skills is phenomenal for these kind of things, right? Because we try to make the system better and better. I keep telling my team, hey, perfect software, we're out of a job. We'll be always sitting home. It'll be done. There's no jobs anymore. There's no perfect software, right? There are always issues. So I would say if you're looking at site reliability, there's what my team and other teams within CBP we keep pushing is certifications for debugging tools, and there's quite a few of them. And I'm sure you look it up. I don't want to name any. I cannot name any here, but I'm just saying is that it is, you can look that up, and that's a great skill to have from training perspective.
Great. Anybody else have anything? We'll move on. Thank you.
I mean, there are plenty of certifications out there that are complementary or provide the expertise, and because I would state that a lot of what we're doing is within a cloud environment. I may be speaking just for my organization, but plenty of good cloud certs from AWS, GCP, Azure, and then a litany of others from Linux Academy and on. So, and again, plenty of Agile certs as well to give you another flavor of some certs that that are important to have and moving forward. But Sunil's right. At the end of the day, it's how good can you troubleshoot?
Yeah, that's an important one there. Brian, you have something on the tip of your tongue?
I'm minding my vendor manners, so I won't articulate things we might offer in the world of certification that have a lack of vendor neutrality on them. But obviously, to Rob's point, they're out there, not hard to search on, and I think really critical. I think one of the things that may be lost on the role of the SRE, because I think oftentimes it gets connected to the ops side of the house because it is sometimes firefighting. I think that it's probably worth mentioning, and maybe it's good for the development folks that listen to this. Having a fundamental understanding of development pipelines. Thinking about whether it's GitHub or GitLab, but what are the workflows that my teams are using? I mean, that's critical stuff in both the pre-planning as well as how are you going to do the firefighting afterward. If you don't mind, I'm going to make a connection to simplicity here again, which is maybe there's another way to think about this too, which is when we do find ourselves in firefighting mode, are we all looking at the same thing? I think one of the challenges with government complexity is because we inherently were born in silos. And then I think what's happening is, those silos are coming down, maybe a little bit faster in the commercial world than in the government world. Because when we get into firefighting mode, I think you mentioned it in the beginning of the setup, right? The classic DevOps discussion is, developers build code, operations, keep things up and running, and never the two shall meet. And then for the last decade, we're talking about how do we bring those two together. This gets back to my perspective on, are we supporting our cultural initiatives, which DevOps is a cultural discussion, but are we supporting it with the right tool set or tool sets? And I think there is a distinct advantage. So no matter who you choose in industry, I think there's a distinct advantage to the idea that are all of my devs, are all of my ops, and are all of my business leaders looking at the same thing? And I think there's there's a method to the madness there. If you're paying on a per seat license for people to be inside of a tool, that's probably not going to drive that single source of truth mentality because of financial burden. So I think one of the things to look at here is look at alternative licensing models, as compared to per seats, because you want to get everybody in the same tool so that when ops is complaining about code or when devs are complaining about, network latency, we're looking at the exact same issue at the metric side. And then, when we think about observability, we tend to think about observability in really three layers. We think of it's the metrics, and there's a huge SRE pre-planning component to the idea of metrics. Maybe we come back to that. But then are the metrics correlated to the traces themselves? Can I see what's happening? Can I see where my API calls are breaking? Can I see where my network flow is breaking down? And then getting correlation all the way down into the logging. I think the challenge is that as we've built this incrementally over time, these silos are real, they exist. And even though simplicity isn't simple, I think the biggest thing we can do is start moving everybody towards a single source of truth.
I remember from my telecom days, it was never anybody's fault. It's like, well, the application people would say, it must be Verizon's fault. Verizon would say it's the application's people. It's I like that idea of having a common pane of glass where everybody's seeing this exact same thing. We got some more good questions. I'm going to defer a little bit to the polls. And the first poll question, they kind of start with a warm-up question a little bit. We kind of work our way to more complex stuff. I'm going to go ahead and, Alyssa, we'll go ahead and fire away all three in a row. But where are you on your cloud migration journey? So if you're on, even if you're not a government person on this, I know you're working with a government agency, just talk about your government agency. And we'll see what happens here. Okay. At least Zoom allows us to vote. For a while there, they wouldn't let the panelists vote for some reason. It's like kind of frustrating. So anyway, what do we have on the answers? Okay. There we go. Things are coming along. It takes a little while for this government to move since 2009, but we're getting there. This track doesn't seem like it is. Everybody agree that kind of tracks to what you thought, or anything surprising there? Okay, let's go to the next question.
I might throw one out there while we're putting that next one up, but I wanted to give Rob and Neil a chance to talk first.
Go ahead.
It's interesting, right? Even on our answers, like migrated makes it sound like it's over, like it's happened. Yeah, we're cloud now. I think the terms I hear a lot about, right? It's public cloud, private cloud, on-prem, legacy. I think the term that I hear the most, or at least I think is the most accurate term, we're not choosing hybrid cloud. Hybrid cloud is the reality of the market, right? We're, to what Sunil said, there are some monolithic apps that are at like the ACAT 1 level, national security level. They're not going to be changing anytime soon. And we're going to continue to manage those as we need to for the premise of national security or, national need. But at the same time, we've got cloud first initiatives where everything's, starting in the cloud. So back to, and I'm sorry if I'm a broken record on this today, but like back to the idea of simplicity isn't simple. The questions we have to be asking ourselves in the planning mode is, are we capable of doing both? Can I get a single, and I use single source of truth more than single pane of glass. I feel like the single pane of glass is like the overused vendor. Sorry, it's the overused vendor expression, but the single source of truth is no matter if I'm looking at apps on-prem, apps in the cloud, infrastructure in either place, am I getting that single source of truth? And that's where I think we really start to break down silos. And so even to the cloud question, I don't think it's a journey that ever ends. It's really just a question of where are you at in your maturity on a journey to the reality that is hybrid.
Makes sense. So we're in the poll question number 2. How are you monitoring your cloud workloads today? Select all to apply. Zoom is getting pretty sophisticated here. This is kind of like pretty cool. You should not be able to do multiple choice. We have that technology now. Okay, can we pull that up? The answers? There you go. So that surprised us or not? Nope. Okay. Got some confirmation there. One of the questions, and I'll let that other question, we'll get to that in a minute, but we've got a good question here. How does low to no code affect things? I think that's really what this is about. It's what are the challenges? In our DevOps community, I just notice almost like a holding war. Sometimes it's like I have to develop every single application, whether it's a case management system or not. And then there's others that, hey, I use low code. It's a shared service. It works great for me. I get all the functionality, enough functionality of what I need. How does a legacy system or low no code affect this process? Maybe start off with you, Rob.
Sure. The same constructs exist as it relates to a true good DevSecOps platform. It's just opening it, again, back to general tech standards and governance. It's, of course, the level of involvement from an SRE is diminished dramatically, but similar challenges do still exist. And like low code, no code, there's a life cycle to it, just like any other app, from onboarding to even to deprecation. So the same constructs exist. The same principles apply. I would just say that the LOE is probably diminished, and it does introduce new challenges, because now we're talking about having some experts or SMEs that are specific potentially to that platform.
Yep. Neil?
Yeah, so I think I agree with Rob, but the only caveat I would say here is low code, no code, from that perspective. Yes, the site SRE kind of reduces a little bit, but also it depends, right, as to what application you're building. We talked about, you mentioned CRM or some case management tools you're building. I'll tell you one thing, low code, no code, good, but if you want you want it customized the way you want to look at certain cases, you are adding a bunch of code which you have to maintain again, which is part of that. That's not part of, because that becomes, so even for SRE in this case, the vendor will take care of the basic things, constructs around it, but any changes you're making and some of the custom stuff which you're building around this low code, no code platform is all yours. So there's a pipeline kind of construct involved for that too. And this is where we are finding some challenges that, okay, this is good. You made this change. Oh, you broke everything else around it, because, we have in certain cases, 60 to 70% customization we had to do to make some things work, right? So I'm a big low code, no code guy. I have a background in that, but I'm seeing that it's not as easy as it sounds. So that's one of the differences what we are finding from our side. So it's a mixed bag, but it has its place for certain kind of right kind of application.
We've discovered as
Like
well that a big burgeoning area has been in, and the need is in integrations, other data sources,
Right.
as well as the ability to connect other applications that are either homegrown or other SaaS type products. So there's another integration layer that SREs need to start to be playing a role in. I see that to be a more of a future state, definitely a burgeoning state for us.
Yeah, we actually started a data integration working group for that very reason. It's like I have to access for like a healthcare record. Let's just say a healthcare record. I have to. How do I get to my Fitbit one day, and how do I get academic data another day? It's really a really difficult problem. Brian.
I'll throw an answer out there. And what I would suggest, and I think Rob hit on it. I don't think the code type matters. What's important is that it's any app, anywhere, any infrastructure. And so whether I'm doing, frankly, you can break things with no code, low code too. And then and maybe a concept that we haven't touched on, but worthwhile given the SRE topic, what do you do when it breaks? So first you've got the question of, how do I even tell when it breaks? Let's assume we have an answer for that, and somehow or another, the SLOs slipped, the SLIs got past us. We didn't premeditate a breakage, so something breaks. Then what do you do? And and I'll maybe put an answer or two out there, and then maybe Rob or Sunil might say what happens in the real world. From my perspective, one of the first things we think about when there is something breaking, it's actually not the fix. It's the mitigation of the pain to the end user or the stakeholder. So I think in these environments where the citizen mission, the citizen experience, and the citizen's the front end, we've got to be able to mitigate right away. And I think that's where a good SRE practice is. And it gets back to that core question: when it breaks, what will you do? And I think some of the best practices that I would offer is the first thing you do is mitigate you're not trying to fix the issue. You're trying to understand the pain to the front end, and you're trying to mitigate the pain to the front end. So maybe it's rollbacks, traffic manipulation, move stuff over. So the question started as low code, no code, but I think it gets back to, on the SRE front, what am I going to do when this breaks? You can figure out how and why it broke later, but you've got to have a plan for what to do when stuff breaks before you even get it into production. And obviously that's vendor world. And now maybe Rob and Sunil can tell us how it happens in the real world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But the only thing I would say, right, is, so see, even with the low code, no code platform I mentioned, right, in our case, a lot of custom stuff we put around that to make it work, right? So if the vendor does an upgrade, for example, patch upgrade or whatever they do, their code upgrade every 3 months or thing like that, something breaks, absolutely breaks all the time. I can tell you that, right? Then how do we react to that, and what kind of trained developers we have who understand some of those, what the changes are, and they're ready to react and make those changes back again. We try and work with the provider, making sure that whatever they are building doesn't break, but that's not the case, right? So in real world, absolutely, we need to make sure that the developer, he or she who's working on this, need to be fully aware of exactly where it's breaking, and it's again go back to the same debugging concept to figure out where the things are. It's a little bit different for like SaaS environments, like even Rob mentioned, but challenges are very similar again, right? So it's probably a little lesser extent, but there are definitely challenges there.
And if I can react to that, and sorry, Rob, I don't want to get in your way. I would just suggest, I don't think that we can make excuses for modern architecture, to the idea that, I think what I hear on the vendor community quite a bit is that the modern, the ephemeral is the word of the day, right? So the containers, microservices, serverless environments, if that's not falling under the any infrastructure, any app, anywhere, I would say we need to study the market capabilities a little better, because it's that should not be a limitation of a modern vendor.
Oh, absolutely, and we 100% agree, and we beat up on the vendor on that. Hey, you fix your stuff, man. Are you providing a no code, low code platform? Shouldn't be breaking on us. I'm saying that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, and again, that's reality is a little bit different, as you know, right? So that's what we deal with on a daily basis here. So
yeah.
So I'll take a different spin. And that actually is one thing we really haven't talked about in any great detail, which is very applicable to Brian's point, and is that how are you actually interfacing with your customers? From a butter bar to a status page, that becomes just as critical in all of this. If you don't set those expectations and provide meaningful communication, then good luck maintaining your customer base. So that's a really big part of an SRE and any sort of release or outage. And there's various manifestations of how we deal with that and try to harmonize it so we can have some enterprise approach as opposed to some of the siloed approaches. Just another challenge that we've got. But definitely just as important, if not probably some of the most important, is that relationship and the services in the SRE world you're providing to that customer.
I'll play off that one too, if you don't mind. I think another really solid, this gets back almost SRE certification and SRE education. What does an SRE need to be able to do from a helping the developers and the ops teams understand the capabilities of monitoring, full bore monitoring. And I think part of what that gets to is, can I see what my users are doing? Do I understand the user journey through the tools that I'm using? And that's both proactive and reactive. There's concepts in the marketplace around real user monitoring, but then there's even, I'd say, more sophisticated concepts around synthetics. What is the idea of bots proactively telling you what your users are going to feel? Because I really think, and maybe the most important takeaway from this, we're talking about IT and the complexities and the simplicity and the breadth of, but what we're really trying to solve for is our user, it's solving my customer's customer problem, right? How do I solve for the user experience? And the best way to solve for the user experience is to get ahead of it before it breaks. That's where something like synthetics and the idea of getting out in front and using bots to tell me when I have a breakage before users even click the button.
Yeah, good stuff. My next question is, teams are becoming increasingly distributed using growing number of cloud apps and services. How do you collaborate today in the context of an outage or migration? We tell everybody work from home, hey, incorporate walks, and how do you put this super team together when you do have an outage real quick? And I think part of that is letting everybody know what's going on and alerting them. What does it look like in the what's the USCIS war room and the CBP war room? Maybe we'll start off with you, Sunil.
Sure. Since we are, so we have these thing called ad hoc. It's 24/7 for us, and we get notified depending on what the severity is. And see, I mentioned, right, we have the 3 SOC, NOC, and EOC, and they decide what the level of severity is depending on what's going on. And then the execs gets notified with respect to what's going on. So what the first thing they do is, from our side, is they start a bridge, and that bridge depends on who needs to get on. Invariably, it's sometimes the vendors providing some of the services that they need to be on, and trying to figure out. See, also we have stakeholders, as Rob mentioned, customers for us, OFO, Border Patrol, you just name it, trade folks, trade partners who are sending stuff from FedEx to Amazon's to Walmart, or everybody across the board. If they're not able to ship, especially in October when Christmas time and things are down, big problem. We get a call from the White House, for example, right? So because of that, we have a system in place for notification. We have a collaboration kind of tools available for developers to get on and start working and figuring some stuff out. But to everybody's point here, to Brian's point and to CTO Rob Brown's point, we try to mitigate in the beginning, right? And we do have an RCA process. So try not to have the same issue over and over again. But what happens to us, unlike some of the thing what Rob works on, which is completely 100% cloud, for us, we do have some legacy applications. And we have some older ways of message queues, for example, we're using. And it's the architecture, the way it was built 10, 15 years back, it comes to bite us once in a while, right? So we're trying to modernize there. So parallel effort going on there. But in the meantime, we have to collaborate to figure out how to do this, because some of these queuing messaging breaks multiple. If you fix something, it breaks 2 other things across the board in the chain, right? So some of the challenges we have, but we do have a pretty good system in place to respond to outages, inform our customers. We do have a dashboard like Rob mentioned, which kind of gets updated real lifetime if something happens. And so far, we're trying to mitigate that as much as possible. But I can tell you, CVP, 24/7, always we have to be on. That's the bottom line. So there's no vacation, anything for us. We're always working. So.
Sorry, hit the wrong button there. Rob?
Well, I mean, I do agree with Sunil. We do have definitely certain assets where it's exactly the same, 24/7. And if we don't have some things up and running, we get the same calls, Sunil. Those are never good calls.
One thing I just total random, I love whiteboards. Both of you gentlemen have whiteboards. Rob, that's your house, right? That looks like a war room. Are you at your house?
That's pretty, I am at my house. And, yeah, this is probably it was probably somebody's very large walk-in closet, and I've just turned it into a office war room.
That's great. I love whiteboards. I think that no matter what happens, as much technology as we get, I don't think whiteboards and probably napkins and writing ideas is ever going to go away. Brian, you want to add anything?
Maybe I just compare and contrast a little bit, sort of what we see in the commercial world versus what we see in the public sector world. And I think, and that's the reality, right? I mean, the public sector world has a layer of governance and I'd say for the better, but I think it goes both ways at various times. What we see in the commercial world, the question's solved a lot easier, right? It's simply a discussion about integrations. What I would probably, I'm just going to stay on the simplicity theme. What I'd be asking people is, what is your capability out of the box? So before I have to bring in experts and before I have to get, complex, customizations that I own, upstream, what can it do out of the box? So, out of the box, the things to look for, does it integrate with ServiceNow? Does it integrate with Slack? And frankly, there's a real reason why that matters. And I think there's some solves for that on the government side as well, depending on what workloads we're talking about. But I think the reason this matters is, and I think both Rob and Sunil touched on it, the breaks themselves, depending on where you break, you might break a back-end service that has many programs down, or, depending on how these things are integrated and built. And so, frankly, what happens is you get this cascading of pain. We can't communicate with everybody. We don't have a central way of having this discussion. This gets back to why everybody has to be in the same system. I mean, I frankly, I think if I was offering like point blank advice, I'd flat out be looking at what can we do from a system reduction point of view? How do we get out of, corner and edge use cases and get to, maybe I don't want to push the vendor model here, but how do we get to a solution that can eliminate multiple vendors, multiple expenses, and multiple complexities?
And to your point, Brian, from an architectural perspective, that's where DDD plays a major role, where eventing plays a major role, and harmonizing on those tool sets and platforms to do that integration and setting those standards in place, from schema registry to the header patterns to how you're doing encryption. Otherwise, good luck. It's a friggin' mess. Yeah. And it's really difficult to wrangle all the cats and dogs, because sticks don't work and carrots don't work either.
The carrot flavored stick, Rob. I've heard that one used before.
Carrot flavored stick. Oh wow, I'm gonna have to steal that one. That's pretty good. I better do the poll question, or it's like the poll people. If we lose our CP credits, I get into the most trouble I could possibly get into. We might as well close the doors here. So I always kind of like get involved with the conversation and screw it up. Can we stick up the last poll? Pretty good. And also I rushed it too much the last time. Sorry about that. I get some back chatter on that. Are the most important for the organization as you move to a modern app environment: agility and velocity, security, observability, manageability? Okay.
Hard to choose.
Hard to choose. What's the best answer, I guess? I mean, let's not say the other ones aren't good. It's just, so. I don't know what's going to happen here.
I think the way
All right.
you almost have to say security. You just have to assume, even though the Rob's answer before, you can't assume security. At one point in time, I was the vendor side of the DoD PKI program. So like ACAT-1, large scale security perimeter program. So you can't assume security, but I think for the answer to the question, you almost have to, because without security, none of this exists in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, but I've answered one, but now I answered two. Log4j and everything has changed everything. So,
well, I'll tell you what, we had a zero trust summit, and then 450 people thought security was pretty important. So on Tuesday. So
yeah, it's
okay, it's right up there.
It's an interesting answer, right? Because I think if you let's say that security, if you gave security as a given, so that would push the number one answer clearly, then goes to agility. But I think to the role of the SRE, agility is built over time. Agility is not simply how fast can I go, because there's going to be a direct correlation to in the beginning of speed will be pain. And so it's interesting from where I sit on this. If I don't know how to tell when I'm having an issue, I'm questioning how fast I actually want to go. So like, I am biased. I definitely have a perspective that observability is what gives you the ability to go fast over time, and strong SRE practices allow my devs to get better at those pipelines and their own agility.
Great. Well, this hour has gone by quick. We're at the closing comments. Anything else that we need to talk about that maybe we left on the table or needs to be emphasized further? We'll start off with you, Sunil.
So one thing I would say, which I'd like to mention to the folks on the call here, is security, of course, like we mentioned, right? So because of that, things are changing how we are doing software development, because SRE component goes without saying. Within the SRE realm itself, we are looking at from end to end, from starting to do some basic development from your IDEs all the way to the code deployment into your containers. We are looking at SBOM is becoming a very, very important component, software bill of material. So after some of the challenges we have had with some of the, I don't want to take any names, but it's some of the challenges we have had with some of the vendors, with their IDEs and some of the projects we have worked on those, and because of that, SBOM is becoming a major factor for us. We are trying to incorporate SBOM pretty much into everything now. So that kind of goes in hand with SRE, because security may not have a direct impact on your operation perspective, but it can have, like a Log4j or something else, which can have impact in various ways, right? So I'll tell you, during Log4j, I'll give an example, right? We are using spreadsheets. I mean, this was like last December. It doesn't make any sense these days, right? We should have our official dashboard through an SBOM process, which lets you manage, track, and tell my boss, the CIO, where we are with some of these components, right? So I just like to add that SBOM is playing a major role. Just for the folks on the call here, please look at that, because you will see, I think you'll be producing more secure code for your customers.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's been a reoccurring theme here at ATARC. Rob.
Yeah, just to add to that, there are great tools out there. We actually have had a tool in place that does the SBOM and supply chain, and it's unfortunate but fortunate that Log4j was our opportunity to get it finally pervasive across the entire enterprise. So now at any given point in time, within any of the environments, including all the repositories, I have a bill of materials, as well as other objects like legal ramifications or license ramifications that are now part of everybody's pipeline, and even embedded into folks' IDEs, so they can fix those dependencies when they need to. So the tools there, the processes are there, and they're relatively mature, but it's a matter of, just like anything working with development teams, is getting them to do something that may be a standard or a layer of governance. It's always a challenge, but definitely very important. And from our perspective, just as we're really big into automation and applying as much intelligence, artificial or otherwise, as well as using bot technology to push the needle and abate some of the challenges that we've got and help with our skills gap.
Yep. All right, thank you for that. And Brian, you get the last word.
I love it. Thank you very much. This has been awesome. I'm very appreciative to have been a chance to do this. I'll end where I started, right? Simplicity is not simple, but I think if you're a leader in the space, you've got to ask yourself, how am I removing tools to get down to single source of truth? And then I think you've got to think about the reality that is hybrid. So it's got to be any app, anywhere, any infrastructure. I've got to stick all of my people in the same tool. They've got to have the same view. So ops, SREs, devs, business folks, and it shouldn't even be, how about if I leave you with this? We've talked a lot about IT the whole day. We never even really brought up the real business of the mission and the customer experience. That's got to be front and center. So eventually, how do I get to simplicity, knowing that the environments I support will always be complex and probably get more complex over time?
Thank you, Brian. Also, thank you, Rob and Sunil. This has been a great discussion. I've enjoyed it immensely. We have to do the final thing. Do you need your CP credit? This is how we work with you we make it as easy as possible. The last poll question, you don't have to answer unless you need one. And next week, what do we have going on here? Creative procurement for innovation. This is going to be fantastic. We're actually starting a working group around this. There's been pockets of excellence in the government, and we really are trying to pull that all together for best practices. So we're really excited about that. That should be fantastic. Well, thank you all. That's all the time we have, and we'll catch you next week.
Thank you.